welcome to Dotting the Iron Spaceship, a podcast about science fiction writing. I'm Bob and this is episode 15. This week I'm going to talk about the trope that only the chosen one can save us. But before we get into that, let's do a quick weekly roundup. Last week I wrote a blog about my strategy going forward with content and what I can add to what I'm already doing. On Tuesday I released a free flash fiction story called In Utero, which is about being pregnant in the future from the prompt of artificial womb lore. I did a review of the relatively new, it's just in its second season, TV show called The Rookie, starring Nathan Fillion. My Patreon exclusive flash fiction last week was called Bullet, and it was from the prompt Time Travel Recruitment. I tried to play around with that idea a little bit. Next week there'll be a blog, a free story, a review, a Patreon exclusive, and a podcast, so keep your eyes and ears peeled. I'm still chasing up a graphic artist, which means that I've sent emails, I've received some emails back that I haven't acted on, and I have to call some people. And I just haven't got around to doing it. It's really hard to make those calls and get up, half the time, well not half the time, 5 days a week, because I'm working nights. I'm going to bed at 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning. I don't really want to talk to someone an hour before I go to bed. And by the time that I get up, it's after they've finished work. So it's not super easy to do all this stuff while you're working permanent nights, but I don't have a ton of choice in the matter. That's where the work is. So I've been jotting down some notes to add some characters and filling out some story issues with Frank Mason's world. I haven't written the story arc up yet for the first season, but I've been thinking about what I need, and there are certain tropes and obligatory scenes that have to happen in a detective story. And so, I need it's not about what I need, I suppose. It's not like you just fill out a formula and then everything just pops out and you've made a detective story. It's about what do people expect and how can I deliver it to them and what's going to be in my story or what isn't. What is or isn't, it's kind of like finding your voice, I suppose. It's what you put in and what you take out. It helps people to understand the story better. So I've been thinking about what kind of characters I need to help Frank on his way, what kind of enemies he needs to face, what kind of people might be, competitive enemies that he's, not an enemy of, like just people who are in competition with him, and how that might play out. And, also trying to think about, with that kind of character, how competitive is he really, and how does he react in certain situations? I mean, that's why I've written the short fictions, like the short flash fictions where Frank's doing something, is to just see what Frank would do sometimes. And a lot of that, in fact, I don't think I've written any of that contemporaneous. I think everything that I've written in the flash fiction is like prequel stories of when Frank is much younger and doing things. I don't think in that case he's met Penelope yet. So I really think I should write the story of Penelope, who's his AI, alien AI sidekick assistant. Not really either of those things. I don't know. Maybe I should just write a story from Penelope's point of view about things. But anyway, so I've been thinking about what I'm going to do in Frank's world and trying to add important things that Frank's going to need. And I've rambled plenty already. Last week I played around with the audio settings, so I hope last week wasn't too bad. I wasn't happy with it, but I didn't save a raw hard copy of the audio before I made those changes. So once I'd made them, I couldn't really go back, which was unfortunate. So I'm going to do that this week. I'm going to save a raw hard copy, and then I'm going to make the audio changes to try and make things a little bit better. What I did worry about was last week I felt like I was auto-tuning my voice too much. So as much as I don't like the sound of my own recorded voice, because it's not as deep as my natural voice, which is a function of how our ears work, I find modifying it specifically and auto-tuning it in a way also makes me feel uncomfortable. But I mean, that's just a part of making podcasts. You're never going to be able to make your voice sound good, I don't think. Anyway, in the same sort of vein, I've been thinking about, right now I'm recording in my room. There's no, I don't record in a cupboard or anything like to try and reduce the reverb. I mean, I listen back to everything that I record and it doesn't sound that bad, but like it could be a lot better. But I think the bottleneck there, I think, is the microphone that I own. It's not a very good microphone. I bought it. It wasn't good. I then had to buy a power enhancer to enhance it as it is. So I'm like, I think I probably should spend some money on buying a new mic. But on the same vein, I mean, I have not made any money from my recent writing efforts. I don't have any patrons currently that are giving me money, and I don't have any things to sell at the moment. So I don't in my ledger, which is keeping track of my expenses, I don't think that I should spend more money on something which hasn't proven to do well to bring in customers and to bring in listeners yet. So it's episode 15. We'll see. I might leave it until episode 20 or something before I do anything about this. I will continue to do work to try and make it sound as best as I can with the tools that I have. One of the things that has helped me out with that is like learning how to, I sort of edit on the fly now, and that means that I'm not spending as much time wasting time trying to get things perfect, which is then giving me more time to focus on what manipulation and how can I best spend my time to make the best product that I can. So anyway, being that I've already mentioned Patreon, I should thank my past and current and future patrons. I just want to say thank you to the patrons who've supported me in the past, and hopefully those who listening to this or reading the stuff that I'm putting out on my website every week have a few dollars to spare and decide to help me out. So if you're one such person who enjoys the things that I'm putting out on my website, the free stories every month, you can get access to now 17 Patreon exclusive stories, 10 of which will soon be collated into my first compilation story that I'm going to put up onto, it will be for sale on Amazon as an ebook, but I'm going to put it up onto Patreon for the patrons who have been supporting me as the ebook for them to download as a reward and as a way to sort of clump together all the first 10 stories, and then I'm going to keep doing that with each story. And I have to work out how to tag posts in Patreon so that people can just click straight on those ones and get the compilation ebooks once they're ready. Like I do every week, I have to thank my King of Awesome, and this week, unsurprisingly, it is Zevin Art yet again. 15 weeks in a row. I don't think I was doing the King of Awesome to begin with. I've only been recently doing it. But many weeks in a row, he's been on top of my Patreon givers for a while. So thank you very much to Zevin Art, and you can steal his crown, or I don't know if it's stealing, but you too can definitely be coronated in the King of Awesome's crown if you are proven to be the most awesome fan of my work. And if you can't give to me on Patreon, then I understand. I was a poor uni student for a long time and mooched quite a bit off of everyone around me. And so if that's you, thank you very much for listening. I hope that I could make your day a little bit better and, maybe put a smile on your face and make you think about some things. And of course, at the other end of the spectrum, if you're the truest fan of all and you want to be crowned the Universal King of Awesome forever, there's only one sure way to do it, and that is to build a giant space laser and burn the URL of my website into the face of the moon. But I've blathered on for enough time. Let's get into the main topic for today. So the topic for today, this is one that's going to get really under my skin, and hopefully I don't max out the mic too many times. But the topic for today is only the chosen one can save us. This is by far the trope that I hate the most in the world. For me, a story where someone is given something not by the strength of their will or the purity of their morals or the accumulated skill of hard work, if instead they're given great things just because of who they are or who they were born from, I have a huge problem with the story. The Chosen One comes in many forms in the way that storytelling works. It has to be one of the oldest written tropes ever written, considering that, as far as we know, the Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the earliest piece of texts ever written by humankind, and the Epic of Gilgamesh is a Chosen One story. Gilgamesh is chosen by the gods to be super powerful, and he goes off and he defeats all these people and he becomes super great, becomes king, and everything's great, and he's the bestest person ever. And yeah, I think it was fine 6,000 years ago in Babylon or wherever the hell it was that it was written. Clearly Syria? I don't know, it was written in cuneiform maybe? I'm getting off topic. But typically, the base story from which it comes is there's someone, they are gifted power due to their birthright, and then everyone sort of reacts as if they deserve to have that birthright, and even if they have to fight to hold on to it, which you'd sort of expect, right? If you're born to be king, you still need to fight to hold on to power because people will still want to try and take your power. But you have this divine right given by, whatever religious figure you want to use, because they all, in history, they have, right? The power of kings. The king is coronated because of the gods. The religion is the one who says this is the person we should venerate. They're the person with all this power, and we're going to let them enslave the rest of us, and we're going to do everything that they say because apparently the god or gods or the person who holds the sky cake has said that this person shall rule over us, when realistically most of the time the person who became at least the first king became a king because of martial power, their ability, and usually they're quite charismatic characters, but usually it was their ability to do horrific violence upon other people that allowed them to gain strength and power of the masses. And so this is the lie that was told, and I guess that's another reason why I don't like it. I already don't like it because it's commonly used by people in a nepotistic way. If someone's born into power, that they should inherit power and have power. Well, I mean, partially, I suppose, like as an Australian, we're quite against that. We have a really strong ethos of fairness that we don't live up to in our culture. But you can always get an Australian on your side or to vote for you, I guess, by appealing to their sense of fairness. That, and I was born super poor and I didn't inherit, anything. So it sort of irks me when people who did inherit things think that they're so much better than me. They're not better than me. They were just lucky. And it's fine to be lucky. You're allowed to be lucky. In Australia, this is called the tall poppy syndrome. It's this idea. Actually, I don't know if it's an Australian thing or if it's a global thing. So I just checked online because this is a podcast and I have the ability to pause recording and check things online. I just checked online, and the tall poppy syndrome is a global concept, although it's not as prominent in other cultures. It's quite prominent in Australia, but apparently it goes back to Herodotus and Aristotle writing about tall wheat and tall corn things in the past, and I don't know where the original usage of poppies comes from or whatever, but anyway, in Australia, this concept that basically the people who think that they're so much better than everybody else will be cut down by the average population in order to give them their comeuppance. For people who think that they're so much better than everybody else that their due is to be sort of taken down a peg or cut down to size or whatever metaphor you want to use. Like I said, we Aussies, we're all about the fairness, so long as it affects other people and not us. If we're getting an unfair advantage, we tend to like to keep it because we're humans. But we have a culture that's quite based on fairness, and whether it was my poor upbringing or whether it's just the fairness part of my brain that tells me that just because someone has more stuff than me doesn't mean that they're any different to me, and that it's fair to inherit stuff, it's not fair to inherit power, right? Our politicians are not hereditary. I mean, it's actually funny because technically Australia is a monarchy. The British Queen is the Australian Queen, and so we live under a constitutional monarchy. But I think for most Australians, they don't even think about it. And for certainly the way that our society runs, the culture of our society, and I could be wrong, there are plenty of royalists, but the way that our culture works is certainly we see ourselves as considerably more isolated and independent from the British royal family than perhaps we once did in the past. Certainly after the events of the First and Second World War, we sort of grew into our own identity, realizing that we're pretty much alone on the bottom of the earth, and it's just us and the Kiwis together. And even so, if the Queen said, this is the new law for Australia, well, it wouldn't. She doesn't actually have the legal power. She doesn't have that legal power in Britain either, but she doesn't have the legal power in Australia to say, the new law is you will only wear green hats or whatever it is that she might make some outrageous law. Well, she certainly has the power to say it. She doesn't have the power to enact law. Only that can be done by, the Parliament. So, and you don't get to be, just because your dad was a parliamentarian doesn't mean that you can become a parliamentarian. Certainly, it's easier to become a parliamentarian if your father was involved in politics because you already have a name. So there's still an element of nepotism that is never going to ring out of the system. I've gone off onto a wild, far distant place from where I wanted to be, but basically what I'm saying is Chosen One stories are terrible and I hate them. I think that the audience of today wants to read stories about people who earn their power and their respect on their own merits, and I don't think that the audience of today really wants to read stories that are about someone inheriting power because of actions that they didn't make and because of power that was given to them or is attributed to them because of their bloodline or because of something that they inherited. Now, that's not to say that a story that has a chosen one isn't going to work. I'm going to talk about some stories that have chosen ones that did work, but I'm also going to say how they could have been better if that wasn't a thing, or they could have been better if they subverted that trope. I honestly think subverting the chosen one trope is better than not subverting the chosen one trope. I mean, like I said, the concept of the chosen one does come from real world place. It is the story that kings and queens of yore told all of the poor people to subjugate them into doing what the kings and queens wanted them to do. And it's even a story that plays out again in politics. Every royal family has to, in some way, tell that story. But even in democracy politics, democratic politics, I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Even in the case where someone has to be elected into power, you can still have instances where people are running off of their mouth saying that they're the chosen one. I mean, it happened at the time of recording. Donald Trump said that like 3 weeks ago. Now, I don't want to get into that kind of politics. I want to stay way out of it. What do I know about politics? Well, what I do know is that I typically try to avoid talking about politics specifically and try and talk, if I'm going to talk about politics, try and talk about it in an abstract way in this podcast, which I will endeavour to continue to do. But it's pretty hard not to talk about politics when you talk about the Chosen One, because it is a fundamental part of how rulers have been chosen for a long time. And so that storyline, I think, it's a story we don't need to hear anymore. I honestly don't think that it's a story that we should be telling. As much as if you're writing it, if you're actually writing the story, and certainly when you are writing a story, you want people who are watching it to sort of empathize with the main character, you can see that it would be an easy and cheap route to connect the audience with the main character if the Chosen One story is it's a wish fulfillment, I suppose, right? If you're an orphan, you wish that you are actually a princess, and that they'll find out, and that you're going to be found out and swept away into the palace and live a life of luxury and all those sorts of things. So it's a cheap way for someone writing to connect a person to the audience by just saying, well, this is the greatest person that's ever been, and you should just, he's going to have all these cool magic powers and adventures. And sure, that's cool, but I think that the best way to tell the story is to not tell it that way, and to just have a character that's a character on their own, and they just happen to have awesome adventures. And that the reason that they're the focal point of the story is because they're the focal point, and not because, the Lady of the Lake came up and gave out a sword or whatever. Getting back to the topic at hand, because I have continued to run off on wild tangents so far during this recording, there are some quick sub-tropes that I wanted to touch on when it comes to Chosen One. So, the birthmark of destiny, which is where the Chosen One has some physical, typically a birthmark that shows that they're actually a person of nobility, and so that's the way that, they've been separated from being the king for a long time, and they've grown up a poor person, and then it's found out that they have this mark, and that's why they're king, because it proves that they're genetically related to the king, and therefore they should have power. The chosen people story of this group of people were the people that were chosen, and therefore they're good. I don't want to get into religion, but that is a focus of religion, of all religions, that they focus on this group of people. And religion has a real strong in-group, out-group focus, and so this our in-group was chosen by the powers that be. And the last one that I want to talk about, which is the one which is, if you're gonna tell a Chosen One story, then the best one you can tell, I suppose, which is the Chosen Many. That's more than just that one person that could fill in the role, and that there are many people that could fill in the role, and it just so happens that one of the many people that could be chosen has been chosen. So, a perfect example of the Chosen Many is the Green Lantern. There are thousands of lanterns. Just so happens that Hal Jordan happens to come across the guy whose name I can't remember, the alien guy who dies, and gets the ring. He doesn't get the ring because of some incredible, bloodline that Hal Jordan has. He gets the ring because it's opportunistic in the fact that he's close, but also he has to prove that he's worthy, and he constantly has to prove that he's worthy in order to be able to be a Green Lantern. That's how they work. So, in doing the research to write the script outline that I use, one thing sort of stood out from, I don't remember if it was from TV Tropes or from Wikipedia or something, but one of the things that I was looking at to sort of jog my brain into creating some kind of coherent notes, which I've already moved all over the shop with trying to record, but just sort of getting the idea into my brain and sort of investigating what I'm going to talk and trying to make it seem coherent, even though I'm feeling fairly certain that this one is going to feel a little bit more all over the place than previous podcasts. The one quote that I keep coming back to that I found is the Chosen One characters are held in esteem for their expected potential, not their past accomplishments. And I think for me that's the crux of it. The character that gets whole armies to follow them because they're expected to be the king, or become the epic general, or whatever is the awesome thing that the Chosen One is going to be today, rather than them having to prove and having to earn it. They just get it given to them. So I made up a couple of ones to talk about that I thought were particularly egregious in pop culture, and a couple of examples of times when I thought that it was okay or a good subversion of the trope. So, The Matrix from 1999, in the first movie, it's kind of okay. Neo, like, the story is a Chosen One story in that, they're literally looking for the One. They tell you that. And Neo is an anagram of the One, and all the things, and they do a really good job of trying to tell a story about whether or not Neo is worthy to be the One. Is he the One? Is he not the One? This guy says he is, that guy says he isn't. Does it really matter? Is it important for him to believe that he's the One? Which is sort of what the movie is. It's the underlying theme of the film. It's important to believe that you have the ability to do things, more so than it is to be born to have them. Where The Matrix really got into trouble was with the sequels. The sequels went off the charts insane, and just jumped off of a cliff and went all in with this guy's the Chosen One, and now there's 3,000 of these enemies and the bad CGI, and they really just... The Matrix is a lot better if you only watch just The Matrix, and if you don't watch the sequels. If you just leave the sequels open, if you just watch The Matrix and then leave it open, it's fine. Also, we're going to get a Matrix 4 apparently, so I'm looking forward to that being horrible. But getting back on topic, in Star Wars, Luke is not a Chosen One. He's a farm boy. I'm talking about the original movie, which is A New Hope, right? He's a farm boy. Some stuff happens that he has no control over. He, has to, like... If you watch the first movie with no other input from any of the rest of the world, and just look at it as a single piece of how it would have been viewed in 1977 when it came out. You have a farm boy who comes across this weird, he meets up with these droids, and the droids are talking about this guy that he thinks that he knows, and then the droids run away, and he's like, well, they're probably going to that guy, and he meets up with the guy, and the guy's like, oh yeah, well, you were pretty good. But I mean, Luke's father is described to him as a Jedi Knight, not King of the Jedi, not greatest Emperor Jedi of them all. He's just one of the many knights of the... He wasn't even a Jedi Master, just a Jedi Knight. And the way that Ben Kenobi talks about him being a Jedi is not, he was one of only 12 Jedi. Like, he's not remarkable in that case. He's just has a skill that other people doesn't have, or he has a discipline that other people doesn't have. He was inducted into this order that other people weren't. And then Luke does some things. He turns out he's got a little bit of magic, and he shows that he's got a little bit of magic by the end of it. That's great. Even with the original sequels, with Empire and Return of the Jedi, Luke is still not a Chosen One. He's the last of the, possible people who could be able to defeat the Emperor and create a new Jedi Order and all those sorts of things. But he's not a Chosen One yet. In fact, he never is. The Chosen One problem comes in when the prequels came out, because in the Phantom Menace, they set Anakin up as a Chosen One. Anakin is born of the Force. He has no father, which creates an immaculate birth story. He has the highest midichlorians of all. Like, people hated midichlorians, and the reason that they hated midichlorians is because it was a way of trying to science the magic out of it, which you didn't need to do. You just needed to be like, yeah, cool, there's spaceships and stuff. Also, there's magic over here. And you don't need to touch that at all. It was fine the way that it was. And when you did touch it, when George Lucas did try to bring in the midichlorians, oh, well, this kid's off the charts and he's got more midichlorians than everybody else, and it turns out that he has an immaculate birth and he's the chosen one, and, the chosen one will bring balance to the Force, and we just didn't need a chosen one story in Star Wars. It could have just been that he was a kid who had some bad things happen to him and he made some bad choices, and then he was redeemed. If you remove those parts from the first movie, there's a lot of the first movie you could remove and make it a much better film. But the general essence of the story that's being tried to be told, you can still tell the story of the Senate. You really don't need any of the junkyard years. You don't need young Anakin that young. A few scenes. He had a shit life. We found him. He's now he's a Jedi person. That's all you need. And he's got some anxiety over his mother. None of that needs to change. You just didn't need to go that step further and make him the only person chosen by the Force to be born. This immaculate, incredible person who's destined to determine the fate of the Jedi. Well, he doesn't need to be destined to determine the fate of the Jedi. He can just be a kid who turned, and it turns out that the power of the dark side is so bad that with 2 Sith they can defeat thousands of Jedi. With a lot of underhandedness. That's a much better story. Speaking of stories that could be much better without a Chosen One story, or by subverting a Chosen One story, I have to say Harry Potter is up there. In the stories of the recent years, Harry Potter is one of the most prominent Chosen One stories in recent pop culture history. Now, I've had this argument with hardcore Harry Potter fans before. I don't want to have it again. The fact is, the common argument against Harry Potter being a Chosen One at all is that both Harry and Neville are born on the same day, and the prophecy says that the person will be born on that day, but it could be like both Harry and Neville fit the prophecy equally as well, and it's Voldemort who chooses to attack Harry and makes Harry the Chosen One, and he's not really the Chosen One, and blah 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 blah. The problem with that is it's not a defense. It's just, okay, so you have a backup Chosen One. Well, that's great, but I feel like that part of the story was really only added in order to sort of defend against the argument that Harry's a Chosen One, and of course, everything's going to go his way because he's been determined by this prophecy, right? People who aren't Chosen Ones don't have prophecies written about them. They're not acting because a prophecy said a thing in a long time ago, right? People who aren't Chosen Ones, they're just people. Sometimes bad things happen, sometimes good things happen, they're just people. People who aren't Chosen Ones, no prophecies. Like, if you have a prophecy that's been written about you before you were born, that talks about you, and possibly might also talk about one other person who you're definitely a Chosen One. There's no argument against it. Where Harry Potter could have been a fantastic subversion of the Chosen One story is by actually having Neville be the Chosen One. Where it gets to that final scene and Harry fighting Voldemort and they're like, pew, 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 right? Even with, you can still leave everything else the same. Harry was still a Horcrux. I mean, by then that Horcrux has been dealt with. So you can still have all of that together, and then when it gets to the final scene, there's some system allows for Neville to get the Elder Wand, and Neville is the one who kills Voldemort. And some people argue that, well, actually Neville is involved because he kills Nagini and blah 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 blah. Well, yes, Neville was also there, and he does help kill the Horcrux, which is true. I mean, I don't think he's the only one. Is Harry the only one who kills Horcruxes? I don't know. It's been so long since I've seen Harry Potter things. I don't remember if Harry's the only one, but I mean, certainly Harry's not the only one who can kill Horcruxes. Like, the most of the Horcruxes are dealt with by, like, the Basilisk Fang, or anyone could wield that. It doesn't have to be Harry to wield that. Anyone could wield Thingamajig's magic sword that can kill Horcruxes. You know, it's only because Harry is worthy, which is kind of... He's not really worthy. He's in great need. Apparently, if you're in great need, you get this sword. If it had turned out that it was actually Neville who killed Voldemort, and you completely turned the Chosen One story of everyone thinks that it's Harry, and it was actually Neville the whole time, man, that would have been a really good story to tell at the turning of the century, entering into the new age of literature that came with the turning of the new generation. Look at these incredible new kids' storybooks that completely subvert the Chosen One story. That would have been fantastic, but it isn't what we got. What we got was a Chosen One story where, you know, Harry was going to win because his name's on the books. I can't get around, I just couldn't be bothered to read... You know, well, I never read Percy Jackson either. And Percy Jackson is exactly the same, right? Percy Jackson and the whatever stories, they've made a couple movies out of it as well. I just don't have the energy to read Chosen One stories where people have power because they inherited it. It's also worth mentioning that I'm not the only one who doesn't like seeing Chosen One stories. I actually think that the audience as a whole rejects Chosen One stories. Yes, there are those exceptions. Like I said, with The Matrix, they're exploring the question, and so the first one is fine, and they double down on it with the second two. But it's not really in the story that made The Matrix famous. Like, they're talking about it as a concept, but it's explored. They're actually trying to do something with it. In Star Wars, it's not until 20 years later when they're making the sequels that they really bring it in, with the prequels. So it's not in the first Star Wars. You don't need a Chosen One story, so what made it great wasn't the Chosen One story, because that wasn't added in until much later. Harry Potter stands out as an exception in a lot of ways, in that, you know, kids loved it, and that's how it got its popularity, and I don't know, maybe because it was a child's story, it was more likely to be successful. I don't know. Kids, not incredible literary critics. So maybe adults, just by the time that they're adults, they're less likely to like Chosen One stories, and maybe that's how Harry Potter manages to snake its way into sort of the prime time. But some of the stories of recent years that sit in my head when I think about Chosen One stories are stories like The Sorcerer's Apprentice, with Nick Cage and that guy, whatever that guy's name was. That story with he's the prime Merlinian, and he has the power, the only person in 600 years to have the power to use magic without a ring or whatever it is. That movie didn't do very well. And The Seventh Son of the Seventh Son, I mean, that movie was so bad that I don't remember anything other than its name. And I can think of other stories where they're clearly based on the Chosen One premise, and they tend to be D-grade movies. They tend not to do fantastically at the box office because people don't really want to listen to a Chosen One story. So I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that, but certainly what I've noticed is Chosen One stories aren't, if they are injected into things, it's usually injected after that period where the story is great, when they're trying to extend the story or push it on. It always seems to come into the sequels. If you had a good story, they bring it in afterwards. I think that's rubbish. One of the things that I do think is really good to do with the Chosen One trope is to subvert it. So some of the best times that it's been subverted in stories, and I mean comedy does subversion really well, and so in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, there's a really great skit where King Arthur is describing to these peasants why he's king and how he got the sword from the Lady of Lake, and that's why he's got this divine right. and the peasants' conversation of like, oh, well, just because you got some sword given out by some watery tard doesn't mean that you have the right to rule all of us. It's a fantastic skit, and certainly if you haven't seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, I recommend you do it immediately because it's fantastic. It's a fantastic piece of culture, and I guarantee you there's a ton of references in there that you don't even realise that you know if you haven't seen it. There was a great Fry and Laurie skit from, I don't remember what season it was that they did, but there's a great Fry and Laurie skit where they subvert the Chosen One trope as well, where there's a father and the son, and the father's all very serious, and he's like, oh, I have to tell you this is very important, now that you're a man. And he tells this story about the son is the chosen one, and he has to go on this incredible adventure, and that adventure involves him getting a flat and moving out of home, and he finally tells the kid that he's got to go off and get a job and enter into the real world in order to have this great adventure that he was born to and destined to. And then after the kid's like, oh, I'm going to go do that, the father says to the mother, like, well, hopefully that'll get him out of the house. That was a really great comedy subversion of the trope. And I think if something is worthy of being subverted in comedy and being ridiculed in that way, it should really make you think about whether or not we need to be telling serious stories using the trope. One of the times that I thought that, so there are 2 times on my list that I made of when the trope was subverted in a positive way, sort of. Like I did talk before, if Harry Potter had been changed where Neville, that would have been a positive subversion of the trope. I actually think that the trope was really well subverted in the Hunger Games. So in the Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen volunteers to go into the first Hunger Games, and she's not chosen to fight. She has she's skilled because she's had to live off of her own hunting skills and things in order to survive in the universe. She's not gifted in the sense of a chosen one, but where the chosen one trope does come in is that the rebellion in the later part of the story does try to make that they use propaganda to make Katniss the chosen one. So it's not, the character isn't ever what the propaganda is, but I think showing the use of using that propaganda to show that you're the chosen one, I think it's a really good way of calling it out how we actually do that in the real world. And I think it's a really good positive way of showing that it's a way, it's clearly negative to manipulate people and not tell them the truth, but I think that it's a really good way of using the trope to show this is not the truth, that this isn't how things really work, and that this is how we're going to use it to build support for our movement rather than it actually being true. The other time, and this is another example of the chosen many, is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So Buffy the Vampire Slayer, I'm talking about the TV show more than the movie. The movie had the same underlying framework. They didn't change that much for the show, but I like the show more than I like the movie. But the Buffy the Vampire Slayer is, there's a girl, every generation there's a girl who's chosen to be the one who has these supernatural powers to be able to fight the vampires. So while Buffy is the one who's chosen, she very equally couldn't have not been. She isn't chosen due to her, she's chosen because she's eligible and then she's picked. She's not chosen because she alone has some special right. In fact, in the show, I don't remember what season. I'm guessing it would have been around 2003 because I was looking up. Nathan Fillion was in Buffy as a bad guy in 2003, and I think it was around that time that they played with this storyline where Buffy goes out and finds the other potential Slayers who can be trained to, they can still be trained to be useful to build an army of Slayers to help her because things are getting out of hand. So even though they're not the chosen one, they're still in the ballpark and they can still be useful and be chosen. And so I thought that was a really positive way of using the sort of chosen many trope, where, you know, when Buffy dies, another person will become more powerful and will become the chosen one. The same way, I guess, the same way that Aang is the chosen one, in that he's the Avatar, like, you know, in The Last Airbender. Aang is the chosen one, but there have been thousands of avatars. They all seem to have their own personality and their own sort of quirks, even though they're the same person, because it's, you know, like a Buddhist style regeneration. I shouldn't use the word regeneration. Reincarnation. So even though it's a Buddhist style reincarnation where it's supposedly like a lama, the exact same person who's been reincarnated, he himself has to find his own way, and he has to struggle and gain power. Even though he's been gifted power, he still has to gain power. And I think that's the sort of there are two sort of classes when it comes to the chosen one. Is the chosen one who has to still earn their power, and they're a whole complete hero where they've got to go off and they have pitfalls, and they have to go through the trials and tribulations of life in order to become a better hero and to gain the tools and allies that they need to defeat the villain. And then you have the kind where someone just inherits power, people just respect them because they have inherited that power, and, you know, disrespecting someone with power can be a bad idea, but if that power isn't earned, then it feels hollow in a lot of ways. Which is clearly a good place to end today's topic, which has kind of gone a little long. So next week, my Tuesday story will be from the prompt Rent-A-Body. On Wednesday, I'm going to do a review of the movie Joker that came out. I saw it this week, and it's awesome. Spoilers. But I'll do a review on Wednesday of Joker and be a little bit more in depth other than just saying that it's awesome. My Patreon exclusive story on Thursday will be I accidentally bought a time machine. And the topic for next week's podcast is time doesn't move between the scenes. If you have a question or a comment, or you just want to tell me how bad a writer I am, you can contact me at contact@robert-lynch.com or on Twitter @BobLynchBSC. I'd really love to know if you think, you know, we should be telling Chosen One stories anymore, if you think that it's time that these tropes should be put out to pasture, or if you can think of a time when the Chosen One story has been really well used. I'd love to hear about it. Anyhow, if you like what I do and you want to help me to make more of it, you can check out patreon.com/RobertLynch. As always, you can check out my website for new stuff every weekday, and I will see you next week.